The fictional neighborhood of Esperanza Sur in Aida has long stood as a microcosm of working-class Spain, a chaotic blend of humor, hardship, and unfiltered humanity. Within that world, the imagined narrative Todos los porros van al cielo elevates the series' spirit to a more allegorical dimension, turning its familiar figures, Aida, Luisma, Lorena, and Mauricio, into modern parables of imperfection and resilience. Though the title seems irreverent at first glance, suggesting a stoner's paradise rather than a moral journey, it encapsulates a profound truth about the show's ethos. Redemption, however absurd or smoky, remains possible even among society's forgotten corners. In this analysis, I will explore how this story expands Aida's universe, blending comedy with metaphysical undertones, and how each scene unfolds as a fragment of both social critique and emotional confession. The opening of Todos los porros van al cielo captures Esperanza Sur with striking authenticity. The air smells of fried food and marijuana, a sensory synthesis of survival and escapism. This first image is crucial, not for its humor, but for what it communicates about class and decay, the repetition of routine, the broken elevator, the sarcastic morning greetings. The coffee that never tastes right sets a tone of existential fatigue. Aida, perpetually overworked and underappreciated, becomes an embodiment of the Spanish post-industrial woman, strong, cynical, yet deeply caring beneath her layers of complaint. Her confrontation with Kema, the gentle baker, symbolizes the tension between decency and disillusionment. Their exchanges are not just comedic, but existential. They reflect two ways of enduring life's mediocrity, through idealism or through irony. When Aida encounters Luisma, smoking on the bench, the story introduces its central metaphor, the porro, as a spiritual symbol. Luisma's half-innocent justification, his belief that time is relative and the hunger isn't, becomes more than stoner talk. It is the lazy man's version of philosophical detachment. The humor here works as a defense mechanism. It allows the viewer to laugh at human absurdity, while simultaneously recognizing its truth. Luisma's character has always embodied the theme of arrested development, the lost youth who never escaped the inertia of unemployment and bad decisions. Yet in this story, his apparent aimlessness transforms into accidental wisdom. When he later claims to have seen San Porrete, a saint made of smoke and light, we realize the narrative is blurring the line between hallucination and revelation. This moment functions as a reinterpretation of spiritual awakening within a secular, impoverished context. Luisma's vision is absurd, even laughable, but it speaks to the hunger for meaning that pervades Esperanza Sur. The scene where he builds an altar in the park, surrounded by candles and a handwritten sign declaring Todos los porros van al cielo, captures the dual nature of faith in modernity, both ridiculous and essential. The humor of the situation does not negate its emotional weight, rather it deepens it. The viewer recognizes that Luisma's faith, though born from smoke and delusion, stems from the same emotional void that drives millions of ordinary people to search for something sacred in the mundane. Lorena's reaction introduces a generational contrast. Her decision to film and upload her brother's sermon reflects how modern spirituality becomes filtered through social media. What was once a private, intimate search for meaning becomes public spectacle. The viral fame of El Santo Fumeta exposes society's obsession with irony, where sincerity is transformed into entertainment. Yet beneath the laughter, there is tragedy. Luisma's naive hope of bringing peace to the neighborhood turns into a meme, an object of mockery and curiosity. In that distortion lies the film's sharpest critique. In a world dominated by digital voyeurism, even purity becomes content. The arrival of the men in suits introduces tension, hinting at the intrusion of external power into a space of innocence. Their interest in the viral profit suggests the commercialization of rebellion, the commodification of authenticity. This narrative twist mirrors real-world dynamics, where subcultures born from poverty and resistance, music, art, street language, are inevitably absorbed by systems of profit. Louisma's religion of smoke thus becomes a metaphor for the cyclical appropriation of the marginalized by the mainstream. What begins as an act of community or rebellion often ends as a brand. Thematically, Todos los porros van al cielo oscillates between realism and surrealism. On one level, it preserves the aesthetic of Aida, everyday absurdity, crude humor, and tender desperation. On another, it drifts into a philosophical meditation on the search for transcendence in spaces where hope has no vocabulary. Each comedic beat hides a moral undertone. When Mauricio mocks Louisma's newfound faith, the scene reflects the capitalist cynicism that defines his character. Mauricio represents the world's voice of profit and practicality, incapable of seeing beyond his own interest. His idea to sell t-shirts with Louisma's face is not just a joke, it is the commodification of belief itself. The cinematography, if imagined on screen, would likely oscillate between handheld realism and moments of hazy slow motion, suggesting the blurred perception between intoxication and revelation. The smoke, ever present, becomes a visual motif for both pollution and purification. It drifts through windows, bars, and the park altar, creating a sense of continuity between scenes, as though the entire neighborhood breathes the same imperfect air. In this metaphorical haze, the boundaries between the sacred and the ridiculous dissolve completely. Aida's role in this cosmic comedy is central. Her skepticism provides balance against her son's naive mysticism. She is the anchor of reason, but her exhaustion carries its own form of faithlessness. Through her, the narrative explores another kind of lostness, the adult version of Louisma's delusion. While he believes too much, she believes in nothing. The tension between them forms the emotional spine of the story. In one of the most poignant scenes, when she kisses her son's forehead and calls him a fool, but a lovable fool, we witness the fragile beauty of unconditional love. It is a small redemption, quieter than miracles, but infinitely more real. Comparatively, Todos los porros van al cielo stands as a kind of spiritual sequel to Aida, much like how Breaking Bad extended its own universe through Better Call Saul. Yet unlike those darker transformations, this story preserves the humor and heart that defined the original series. It does not glorify crime or misery, but rather finds poetry in small, absurd moments. The humor functions as emotional camouflage. Behind each laugh lies a social wound: unemployment, loneliness, lost youth, and generational stagnation. The laughter keeps the pain bearable, just as the smoke keeps the air breathable. The story also offers a subtle commentary on religion itself. Louisma's Saint of Smoke becomes a parody of institutional faith, yet one that paradoxically recovers its original function: to offer comfort to the poor. Unlike organized religion, his creed requires no hierarchy, no money, no promise of afterlife, just a shared joint and a few kind words. In that sense, Louisma becomes a prophet of compassion, not doctrine. The narrative invites us to see holiness not as perfection, but as empathy disguised as foolishness. My own reaction to the story was unexpectedly emotional. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood, not unlike Esperanza Sur, where humor was a survival strategy and absurdity a daily companion. Watching Louisma preach peace through smoke reminded me of the way some of my own friends used to philosophize about life between laughter and hardship. There is a certain truth that only the desperate can articulate, one that sounds ridiculous until you recognize its sincerity. That recognition is the key to understanding Aida. Its characters are not caricatures, but mirrors of our collective exhaustion. In a broader sense, Todos los porros van al cielo functions as a social chronicle. It captures the generational fatigue of Spain's lower classes, the long shadow of economic crises, and the erosion of traditional dreams. The factory jobs are gone, the education system promises little, and yet the need to hope persists. In that vacuum, people like Louisma invent their own cosmologies. The porro becomes a sacrament of temporary peace, a way to exhale despair. The story's title, then, is both a joke and a prayer. If we examine the final sequence, when two mysterious men approach Louisma, it becomes clear that the narrative is setting up a moral choice. Will he sell his message for fame or remain true to his innocence? The open-endedness of this moment reinforces the central ambiguity of the story. Redemption in Aida's universe is never complete. It's a daily negotiation between cynicism and faith. This ambivalence is precisely what makes the show resonate. It refuses to offer easy answers or sentimental resolutions. Stylistically, the imagined film version would thrive on contrasts, bright daylight scenes against the grayness of the neighborhood, sudden bursts of laughter amidst silence, improvised dialogue that feels painfully real. The script's rhythm, alternating between sharp humor and introspective pauses, mirrors the emotional elasticity of the working class, forever oscillating between despair and defiance. The genius of Todos los porros van al cielo lies in its ability to make the absurd sacred. By transforming a lazy stoner's fantasy into a universal metaphor for human longing, it redefines the limits of comedy. It tells us that even in laughter, there can be grace, that sometimes stupidity is the only form of innocence left. In the end, what the film suggests is not that marijuana leads to heaven, but that kindness, forgiveness, and small moments of absurd love might. The smoke is merely the vessel. When the credits roll, imaginary though they may be, we are left with a bittersweet feeling, the same one that Aida always evoked, the laughter that hurts because it's too close to home. The characters do not change the world, but they illuminate its contradictions. They remind us that dignity can exist without success, that joy can bloom even in failure, and perhaps, as Luisma believed, that a bit of smoke rising to the sky is not a symbol of escape, but of connection, the breath of those who refuse to give up on finding light in the haze. Ultimately, Todos los porros van al cielo is not about drugs, faith, or comedy. It is about survival, about how ordinary people reinvent meaning in the ruins of modern life. Its humor is not an evasion, but an act of courage, a declaration that even among broken elevators and broken dreams, laughter remains our last form of transcendence. In that laughter, perhaps, lies our own small heaven,